Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Super Soldier Talk. If you enjoyed that journey through the universe, that animation was created by Thomas Alvin. So, Thomas, once again, thank you for that. So, yes, the name of the show is Super Soldier Talk, and our guests would we go into super soldiers, the secret space program, sometimes extraterrestrial. This one is going to be more of a physics lesson today because we have the amazing Dan Winter here. Hello, Dan. How are you doing today?
Nice to be with you, and you have a wonderful audience. You're really very pleased to be here.
And I like to think that the audience members of Super Soldier Talk are a little bit smarter than some of these other audience members, but I'm not bragging here. But we also have Hanna Spence. Again, welcome back, Hanna. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yes.
Good to be back.
So I want to thank Hanna for helping nudge me this direction. So I've been a fan of Dan Winter's work probably since when I started doing these neocubes back in the day. And back then I had this ostrich egg, and I was putting like gold gilding in it. I don't know if you know about the implosion thing, the ostrich, the eggs, the egg shape. But,
absolutely.
Yeah. So way back then I had eggs in there, but people were complaining. They were saying, "Oh, the eggs they just affect the energy." So we just kept with the sphere. So I said I worked really hard to get this neocube put together recently for a client, but so yeah, we use the sphere now. But
very impressive. Very impressive.
So yeah, you put this on your lap to meditate, and again, it has the sacred geometry. We're going to go into sacred geometry today with Dan's presentation and why it's so important. And yeah, so this particular device, anything that is pyramid or cone shape, produces chi energy, and this is a chi energizer. So there's quartz crystals, or actually crystal skulls inside this thing. And yeah, you put this on your lap and you meditate. So if you want to learn more about that, you can click on the description, but it's not more about my stuff right now. So Dan, we have where should we even begin this conversation?
Well, we just launched the project with Hanna's help, physicsofsoul.com, and we've kind of arrived at, after many years of studying the physics of human bliss and realizing that the DNA recursively braid implodes when you have heart-brain coherence, our flameandmind.com brainwave app. And so the DNA is recursively braiding and thickening, and that is a compression effect. And out the center of that implosive compression, literally, if you have access to bliss, comes a different kind of electromagnetic. That normally electromagnetic is what's called transverse wave, where the inertia is moving, the wave is moving up and down perpendicular to the direction of wave propagation, called transverse EMF, which is all of our radio and communication. However, after there's a squeezing effect, there's an implosion down a vortex cone, climaxing what's called Planck length in time, where out the center of that pine cone squirt gun comes coherent longitudinal EMF, sometimes called scalar, a compressional wave where the direction of motion of the compression is parallel to the direction of propagation. Sound waves, for example, are mostly longitudinal, sometimes called scalar. And the point is that if you line up those compressional waves symmetrically from opposite directions and literally conjugate or implode, you can get a perfect squeeze, like a well-designed love hug or tomato juicer. And that squeezing phenomena, a compression, for example, the first nuclear device was named implosion for that reason. They lined up the compression longitudinal, got critical mass. And you can't get critical mass from squeezing from transverse waves hitting center because they're going up and down. That don't help. No, if you want to heal something, get negentropic self-organizing, this symmetric opposing squeezing phenomena, if you do it opposite, it's called conjugating phases. That creates that implosion to center. And out the center of that squirt gun comes this coherent longitudinal EMF, sometimes called scalar. And it turns out we can prove, and we'll carry on about this later, but it turns out we can prove that coherent longitudinal EMF is the stuff that Gurdjieff called Kesjan body, the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka, the Tibetans called it the rainbow light body. Now electrical engineers can measure it. That is the stuff. That coherent longitudinal EMF, that is the stuff You have to make. Gird yourself. If you didn't make a Kesjon body, you ain't immortal yet.
So can I pause you right there, Dan?
Let me just finish. So
Okay.
that coherent longitudinal EMF, if you're emitting that, that means you can measurably lucid dream. You can measurably take something through death. That coherent longitudinal EMF, we know the frequencies that make it, is the only physics of clairvoyance. It's the reason when the kids start to see without eyes, they suddenly become clairvoyant and they see their ancestors. And that is literally the stuff of ancestor. That is the physics of soul.com. And the thing that, I'm pissed about is until government gets taught what a soul is by electrical engineers, we are going to have billions of soulless kids. So that's my 2 cents.
So just to circle back, so you mentioned
Hanna,
Kesjon body.
could you introduce? I'm sorry, guys, I didn't introduce our guest. So Dan is a multifaceted, so many things, physicist, quantum physicist. Hanna Spence. So you are a futurist, and and also working with Dan Winter. But yeah, go ahead, guys.
Well,
Please.
I just, because sometimes the audience, some of us, we like to say we've learned to speak Danese or Winterese, or, but so I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dan. I just wanted to circle back to Kesjon body. And would you say that that's synonymous with a vortex, of consciousness, a plasma cloud of information that we can move from being in our body to successfully vortex out to where we can be in the astral realm, or inhabit the ray, so to speak, right? By being able to, like our soul, right? Our ability to move in and out of the body without losing any information is almost like a skill. And it's like this plasma cloud of consciousness that wants to vortex in the body while we're, awake and here. We want to be really strongly, that plasma vortex
it's
strongly come in. But it's also like a plasma cloud, wouldn't you say? Would you, the Kesjon body, the rainbow light body, these are all descriptions of this field of charge that is a single unique soul identity that is emerging from source creation, but we have this.
That's
great.
This creation. Your intuitions are all useful there, but trying to talk in terms that electrical engineers could follow, what we're saying specifically is that the aura becomes dense, literally centripetal, and you can measure focused attention because it literally makes electric fields compress and get dense. When the aura gets dense, then the transverse waves become sorted at the center of that vortex and start emerging in this coherent longitudinal compressional array, and then you inhabit a larger array, literally the physics of what the Aboriginals called songline dreaming tract, literally the collective unconscious, literally ancestor memory, the only Aboriginal name for God. So that coherent longitudinal EMF array is absolutely what this coherent longitudinal body, it's literally a cloud of charge that's become so centripetal that it's emitting coherent longitudinal, and then you inhabit a larger array. We say, your synapses in your cortex, that's an array. You're inhabiting an array now. Consciousness is only a name for a vortex of charge inside the array of synapses in your head. However, if you would like to take something through death, as indicated by ability to lucid dream, then you're going to need to be able to hold that vortex together outside your body. And step one, as you're learning to lucid dream, is for example, if you get to sleep on a magnetic line cross or have access to bliss, your aura gets more and more dense, and then you can keep that coherent vortex outside your body, just what you're saying. The thing that's a tragedy here, and I mean a shocking tragedy, is because governments are soulless, don't know what soul is. There's a billion kids today that are sticking Bluetooth headphones in their head in Wi-Fi electrosmog in metal buildings, and all of that shit, I mean crap, is literally stealing the souls of billions of children today because no one taught that government what a soul is.
So petitioning for warnings on Bluetooth that indicate that it is upsetting the electrical charge of the human body in a way that is detrimental to the growth of the child, there should be a warning. And that's the sort of thing that if we're looking solutions, okay, how do we move from where we are to where there's a world where people know how dangerous that could be for a child? Okay, so petitions you know, and this awareness. And I agree, the people that are making the decisions and who are in charge of it, putting the warning labels on those sort of things, or how do we go about it?
It's actually, but first we have to have a change of philosophy in government to recognize that there is something about the human condition, which actually we call it bliss. It's actually charge compression, which enables literally the harmonic inclusiveness and heart rate variability, which defines immune health, which is indirectly defined by, does your child have access to bliss? Which is why every Aboriginal knows that the definition of culture is, can you teach your kids to have a bliss experience? Well, guess what? In the West, we don't have culture because we don't have a clue. And if you can't teach your kids how to have a bliss experience, they won't get that compression that makes a soul. But I think
because when they're in bliss, the DNA is unwinding and the DNA becomes like an antenna that can connect to that charged cloud of their ancestors who love that ley line. They're connected, like it's connected to the land, those veins of the Earth's energy. It's sort of their section of the Earth that you know, because it's deeply connected. Which means
the Aboriginals, they lived on the same magnetic line for 1,000 years, and that magnetic line across the continent was a family pet, and they could steer the storms. That's a lucid dream. But let's start, before we get to the, you know, hygiene suggestions, maybe let's start with just a slideshow about the wave mechanics. Is that okay?
Yeah, I want to know is what would be the Akashic records? Is that, so that's outside?
Yeah, so no, that's exactly what we're saying here is there's a million names for this, except how do engineers measure something that makes this shareable? So it's called Communion of Saints, Akashic Records. It's called, ancestor memory. But and the Aboriginals called it ancestor memory. That was their name for God. But actually, now that we know, you can train the same brainwave harmonics that make kids have bliss. And not only the kids start seeing without their eyes, but that same moment they start becoming clairvoyant. So that longitudinal coherence is the only physics of clairvoyance, which is how the kids start seeing their grandmothers and your dead grandmothers. And the same physics when the Olmec used an obsidian mirror for ancestor phone calls, and then John Dee did the same thing. They were actually using a phase conjugate coding to prehend the longitudinal coherence. So all the data fits together, and the harmonics the universities have proven trigger lucid dreaming turned out to be implosive compression. Like, you make coherent longitudinal stuff, and this is the stuff of ancestor memory. This is heaven. This is Champs-Élysées. This is the physics, and this is a shareable wave, and it's teachable by measurement. But anyway, I since I started this slideshow, let's see here, share screen. Let's just see if this works. We tested once here. So I'm going to share a window, and here is Tours Talk. This is a keynote. Here goes. Share. Okay. So James, if you click on that, can you see that now, folks? Are you seeing it?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay. Yes. So that we were talking about the basics we were talking about before we came on the air. So you see the transverse wave, all of our radios, is the wave is going up and down perpendicular to the direction of propagation, where a longitudinal or compressional or scalar wave, the wave of compressional inertia is traveling parallel to the direction of wave propagation. And the thing is, if you arrange these longitudinal waves then symmetrically from opposing directions, you can get a symmetric implosive squeezing at center. And that's actually, that symmetric implosive squeezing at center, if the harmonics are what's called phase conjugate, then the center literally implodes and becomes self-organizing and negentropic. It's the physics of how phase conjugate mirrors in physics, optics, make time reversal and negentropy, which is simply self-organization. But so where this physics is going then, and we'll play the animations of how this results from the braiding of DNA during bliss, but it squeezes that vortex down this caduceus, which is golden ratio, to a threshold named Planck, length and time, the musical key signature of every wave in physics. And at that Planck threshold, the squirt gun spits out that coherent longitudinal. Well, guess what? What's coming out there is literally the physics of soul. That is the soul coherence. That is actually the moment when the body makes something that goes through death. And here is Tom Bearden proving that longitudinal wave is the only physics of what are called gravity waves. And this is how pyramids harness them. And the piece that was supposed to go with this was just if you want to see visually how this happens in DNA only, if your kids get access to bliss process, it's the recursive braiding in DNA triggered by coherent heart harmonics. So here's the DNA cascade. It's a ratcheted dodeca down a helix. It's in French and English in case you. And so this is the dodeca helix, which is actually the geometry of DNA. And this is one rung of the ladder of DNA. And at the center of the ladder rung of DNA is hydrogen, which is actually a golden ratio bond structure. So the
Dan,
zipper.
can I just pause you real quick? The dodeca helix of the DNA. So just to focus on that, because I think that's a really powerful thing for people to really deeply. Okay, that image right there that you have. So is that dodecahedron? They're sort of nested within one another. It's like twisting.
Yeah,
as it goes down.
Helix. That's the braiding process.
The braiding from these intertwined dodecahedrons, right?
Yeah. It's from Ann Ting, Zodiac magazine. She said the vertical increment and the horizontal increment and the radius of turn are golden mean squared, and golden.
That right there. Yeah. That part right there.
That's the implosion. And we have measured that process of that braiding from thread to string to rope to fat rope is actually measurably triggered by heart coherence. I pioneered the physics here, and then Glenn Ryan measured it. So here is the coherent harmonics of a heart in love. And the DNA receives that love by coherently braiding. And it literally recursively braid implodes, and the plot thickens, as it were. And so that thickening process, that you have the thread to string to rope to fat rope. It's the answer lies folded in an envelope. And that recursive enveloping of the DNA, when it's phase coherent, implodes. And that is whether or not your child has a soul, actually.
And so the thickening of the DNA is directly correlated with the thickening of the aura and the dense and that centripetal.
A parallel process.
Also the aging too.
That's right. A parallel process is happening in the glands. So the DNA is doing this, it's a recursive braid and a braid and a braid and a braid. And then if you look at the center of that, it's actually a vortex tornado in the DNA during the recursive braiding. And at the 7th recursive turning inside out process, the DNA becomes measurably Lord of the Ring. Here's a photomicrograph of DNA in a torus.
Right.
It's actually imploding. And that makes the DNA far more centripetal. And that's actually named consciousness, that process, because then now the DNA can radiate that coherence. And so that's, you see how if your child has access to magnetic coherence, I'm going to stop this here. Your child has access to a form of bliss process, yoga. If your child has access to where magnetic lines cross, sacred space, a stone circle, a forest. If your child is not in a metal building with dead air and electrosmog and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi all day long, then your child has a shot at having a soul. Tell your teacher that. That's the thing. So we need to prioritize by government. And you remember when the medical stabbing process, their pets were not recognizing they're humans because what was missing? The aura, the soul. So governments make soulless decisions until electrical engineers teach government what a soul is. This is my physicsofsoul.com new project. That's why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is really important. And that's why this, to me, feels like a grassroots movement. And I find myself frequently telling people about this new science and how amazing it is for humanity and how simple it is and resources if they're interested, because, people are waking up about a lot of things right now. And if we do know what the solutions are, because once these people in that have that ability to, move building codes, for example, to where certain things are very, it's very known what the impact on the human health is going to be of certain building materials in certain shapes. They do need to be aware of that. So beyond just a grassroots movement, how do we get that information to them? How do we implement that change? And then the second follow-up thing that I was mentioning to James before the call that to me feels really important is, what do we do with all the metal buildings that are already there? How do we override that?
We do
put
have a
phase
beautiful
conjugate coatings on? Do we start
We have to
pumping
rebuild
a
have
copper
like
wire
domes.
throughout it to override it, to give the energy, the soul away to get to the human? What do we do? Because no one's going to want to tear down all those buildings, right?
Well, it's wonderful that we actually have a global international movement, bioarchitects.net, architects all over the world that now understand, and that once we proved that you could determine which architect should get a paycheck after you measure the capacitance of the building in exactly the way we would tune the capacitance of James Rinck's cube, the same physics. We take the spectrum analysis of the weak capacitive field, flameinmind.com/life force, and we tune it to be implosive. And we predict in advance which building or which James Rinck cube would cause a seed to germinate and a child to grow. So after you know which building is capacitively centripetal, then you know which building can make a child, a seed, grow, literally, because it requires centripetal force. So now that we know what biologic architecture is, literally, you make a living electric field, requires high dielectric, namely biologic material, natural stone, natural fabric.
Like maybe warmest.
Right.
Well,
So to me,
it's very good. It's a phase conjugator, yes. And then so you got the high dielectric materials, and you got to eliminate, the steel and aluminum and the electrosmog. And then you get the ratios correct to tune for plankfire.com, which is the title of my new book, plankfire.com, which is all life force, all consciousness, and all gravity is caused by charge collapse in the equation Planck times integer exponents golden ratio called fractality. And that charge collapse, that charge implosion, is the physics of the cause of gravity, consciousness, and life force. And so you tune all these devices the same way you tune a capacitor to make gravity. And that tuning operation then allows you to make a building that makes life. It is the only definition of sacred space.
So can I just make sure I understand? So to tune, so you would take the measurement, because to me it seems like we're wanting to heal spaces, right? We're wanting to measure it, find out, does the space enhance life force? If not, okay, what can we do to remedy the situation? Now, what comes to my mind is, sort of, there's a lot of square buildings out there, right? And cube, rectangular shape. But what if we were able to start implementing curves, and it was sort of, someone could modify an existing structure to have more of the curved lines, to have the sacred geometry, somehow, get beyond that cube shape, just like we know with the Star Mother sacred geometry, the dominant geometry of
Star Mother,
geometry of our reality.
Maybe explain what a Star Mother is.
Yeah, well, we called it the mother of stars. It's simply the nest of the model of the nesting of all platonics. So tetracube is almost visible green in center, 5 cubes into pentodeca there, cellate pentodeca, ecosa, dodeca, ecosa, only possible 3-dimensional fractal, actually. And that implosive compression is literally, I wrote the new equation to prove, that is the structure of hydrogen, absolutely. And the SPDF subshells of the atomic table, they nest only and exactly like that. The orbitals of the planets of the solar system, they nest only and exactly like that. The nature of the hadrons of the nucleus, they nest only and exactly like that. The reason that, for example, golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics is because that golden ratio stellation dodeca ecosa and the golden ratio embedding of the cube in the pentodeca is the perfection of constructive wave interference, therefore the perfection of charge collapse. And implosive charge collapse is the origin of gravity, neg entropy, life force, and consciousness. So actually, the reason that all those structures have to do this is because if charge collapse ain't working, it's dead. That's the Star Mother kid, basically. And so that's a model. And so when we apply that to architecture, we not only know the ratio, we know the scale, and it's all proven and implemented by, you take a frequency signature and you retune it. And then we proved that the bamboo buildings, literally, we measured it, proved which ones cause seeds to grow, and the steel and aluminum buildings will kill those damn seeds and the kids. Hello. This is Biologic Architecture 101.
Well, wait, hold on, Hannah. So the banks dictate what structures you're allowed to build with that loan money. So we have a situation here where we are entrenched in a system.
The same banks who don't know what a soul is, implemented by governments who don't know what a soul is, the same banks and governments that are now stealing the souls of your kids because they don't know. Let me give you a short story. So our friends in Turin, the bank and the government said, well, your four-story, new sacred site healing center, the basement, you got to put steel rebar in the damn concrete because we're making you do it. But the rest of the building, they said, okay, you can put your carbon fiber and your bamboo and your natural rebar in. And guess what? In that building, you walk into that basement and you feel like Mared. But in the rest of the building, you can have waves of bliss. It's very, very simple and palpable.
Well, certainly there's got to be ways to get around all that.
Yeah, can we put paint coatings? I mean, what do we do? Because, no one's going to want to tear them down, right?
Hanna pioneered that. They were using copper powder in the paint in Torino with Kudai and Claudia, actually. And copper powder in paint can help a little bit. And super dielectrics in paint, the certain calcium and phosphate paint, which approximate super dielectric, they can be helpful too. So there are coatings that are super dielectric. In fact, that's how Nostradamus' scrying worked.
What if there was copper wire that was being threaded into those buildings? Wouldn't that be, because if I say, for example, someone had a situation, their child was in a metal building in a school, or they already have a house or apartment, if they were to put a copper wire out the window all the way down to the ground, or even multiple through each room, would that be enough to at least, what can we do, really? If you had a metal building and that was the only thing, what would you do, Dan? What would you build things on?
Well, there's a couple points to be made here. One is actually building a Faraday cage is the opposite of embedding in the Schumann resonance. Faraday cages are only where you're living in hell. Okay, I might need a Faraday cage. But if you want the Schumann resonance, which is how pyramids work and how bliss works, then you're going to have the opposite of Faraday cage, which is called embedding. But the other thing is there's this thing called quality of ground. Everybody who's read the book Earthing knows that if your kids go barefoot in the mud, they'll have an immune system. And if your kids have rubber sneakers on metal sidewalks, they're going to die. So read the book Earthing. They know what grounding is. What they don't understand is there's something called quality of ground. So if you're they have these healing blankets where you plug the ground wire into your building, Well, it turns out that if your building has all kinds of crap, electrosmog, which is sharp square waves running around that building, well, then the ground in that building is going to be hell, actually. And so those people in those messy buildings need to run just exactly what Hanna just said, a copper wire down the side of that building and put a ground rod in and see if they can find sacred ground. Well, grounding is actually access to fractal charge distribution, which is the reference, sometimes called heaven. Hey, Ave. And so access to fractality and access to ground are the actually same thing. It gives you a phase relationship to perfected charge distribution and therefore mindfulness. So the subject of grounding is as profound as possible. It's fabulous.
So you think that would be something that people could do to at least help? I'll give you an example.
Evaluate the quality of their ground. And we taught the dairy industry for decades that all the cows will stop drinking and the farm goes bankrupt immediately the day the cable TV guy hooks the ground rod from the cable TV to the power supply. And now the kids are getting a microvolt every time their nose touches water, and they all stop drinking. And that farm died. All the cows died. And I was there when the lady was crying, okay, because they didn't understand stray ground currents. So grounding is a very, very tricky thing. It's actually, that's why you need that fourth wire going back to the power generation plant, and don't send the ground poison back through the ground.
So that's a solution then.
Wisconsin learned that the hard way. I'll tell you, I was there.
By having a grounding wire going back to the original source, so it's a closed loop and it's not leaking.
In Europe, their hygiene here is a little better. But anyway, go ahead.
That sounded like a very important key point for these people who are in charge, the decision makers, to understand. Again,
the dairy industry started to teach them. But then when in Finland, the law changed and the kids were all invited to go barefoot, and the academic performance went off the charts pretty much that same day, I think they learned something.
Absolutely. I wear the grounding sandals pretty much everywhere I go all the time, and people are, upgrading their sneakers, putting copper nails in, and
Because your body needs phase relationship with the earth to achieve distribution. So all grounding for electricians and psychologists is access to charge distribution, which is called a fractalfield.com.
Well, I'll give you an example. I have a camper van conversion that I'm building, and then I was studying dance science and really starting to learn how this energy, this charge collapse is happening, and I'm really, wow, what can I do to help my soul vortex strong into my body and really be present and feel really great and have the expanded aura and whatnot. So I started putting copper wire in the van and giving it a path outside, and it did start to feel better. Maybe not everyone's as sensitive as I am to be able to notice it, but sleeping in a metal box, right?
Yeah.
It's concerning. And I did start to put a clay-based, totally natural-based paint that is not necessarily been measured to be phase conjugate, but it's based from the earth to try to override it. And energetically, to me, it's made a difference.
That's great. But let's see if James had more questions here. How are we doing on the plan here, James?
Yeah, let's go to the grounding. How much time do you recommend maybe per week to be barefoot in the ground? Because
well,
northern latitude climates may not be conducive to that in the winter, but or you can even talk about sun gazing.
Yes, I love the example when Jasmine was from Australia was teaching people how to live without food, and of course you needed to be barefoot in nature a certain part of the day, and the other thing is you need to spend a certain part of your day doing whatever you believe is your highest level of service, because during doing that you will implode, And the one thing is, then the TV producers asked Jasmine to prove that she was living without food, and they stuck her in her hotel, and it almost killed her. So it's actually the access to embedding. It's not just ground, it's embedding in the Schumann cascade, which is the perfect phase conjugate pump wave, which is the reason the pyramids make pyramidwirelesspower.com. They're called the Hummer because they get the Schumann. So the goal actually is to be able to feel the Schumann cascade, which ain't making it into any big city. Oops.
Okay, let's go into, how about this? Let's talk a little bit more about longevity. So, according to our scientists, with telomeres in particular, it looks like when they unwind the DNA, we start to age, and the body is going through this process where it's trying to regenerate itself, but it tears apart other DNA to regenerate, and then it's a cycle where you. So, I know there was the magnetic Bordeaux machine. So that was invented in France in the 19th.
Well, that was a name for Antoine Priory's experiments. And that is the antecedent to my invention, therify.net. So it turns out that Antoine Priory, the Bordeaux machine, used a series of harmonics, which we inspected from history. He got them from Reif and Minkowski. And he approximated, he was very close. He had 4 harmonics that were very close to PlanckFire.com, golden ratio times Planck. And once we realized the principle behind what he did, he healed thousands of cancers, Antoine Priory, proven by the French government. Then we perfected what that is. We discovered the equation predicts exactly. He didn't even know that you needed 2 opposing tubes to phase conjugate and implode. And so we built that into therify.net, which is now successful in 25 countries. It's a bit expensive. That's why we're developing less expensive technologies today, like piezofire.com, which Hanna was just showing there. And all we're doing is we're taking that perfect phase conjugate pump wave that Caduceus, that's piezofire. Thank you, Hanna. And so one is a piezo speaker and the other is a bifiller Tesla coil. And in both cases, we feed implosive harmonic cascade called implosion, PlanckFire.com, a cascade of harmonics, golden ratio times Planck up and down the accessible ladder of the speaker and coil. And then by making them 180 degrees out of phase, we implode and you feel a tingle, centripetal, implosive presence of capacitance. And for example, a bunch of our friends had a hernia, extreme hernia pain. And actually 2 or 3 occasions we had people, 1 session, piezofire, hernia pain gone sustainably. It's amazing. So if the pain is rather localized, and this is a good example because actually pain is a name for fractality that's electrically broken and therefore charge is bleeding. That's the definition of pain. So anything significantly centripetal is literally electrically the opposite of pain. It's very simple. So if you implode capacitance or you implode inductance, one is more for bone and one's more for flesh. So at piezofire.com, less than $1,000. Whereas, so the other technologies were expensive. We're developing others. We have plasmafire.com, piezofire.com. You can see them all on the web there. But so the concept here is simple. You restore centripetal forces and you restore negentropy and self-organization. But then back, finally, James, just on your question specifically, longevity, I would mention that medicine is absolutely clear. The medical literature is absolutely clear. You measure the harmonic inclusiveness, HRE, of your heart, and that will measure how much immune system you got. It's the fastest way to measure them. Now, it turns out that harmonic inclusiveness is perfected by golden ratio times Planck, actually, because the non-destructive interference of the contained harmonics. So this is what we learned from, I invented the word heart coherence. It's now realheartcoherence.com. But heart coherence is actually an example of a measurement. Yeah, so that's called the Bordeaux machine. It's actually that Antoine Prieur's device. In fact, you can see the largest display of the literature on Prieur there, Antoine Prieur's Bordeaux machine, the complete history, hundreds of pages of the documented history, all those graphics are all there. So you go to theraphi.net, T-H-E-R-A, theraphi, P-H-I, theraphi.net, and you click on the How It Works page, and there's hundreds of pages of every single document in the history of the Antoine Prieur device right there. And you can actually see the frequencies he used. For example, he used only one tube instead of a pair. He didn't know what phase conjugation was, and he used an approximation of the harmonic series of pure implosion, PlanckFire.com, which we then saw and perfected. So he was spending millions of bucks on each device, and he did. He healed thousands of cancers. The French government proved it. However, since there was no one that could say how or why it was working, no pure principle. So the pure principle was not, and you know what I find shocking, excuse me, but I remember when Maurice Cotterell said, the physics community is pretty arrogant for not having a clue why objects fall to the ground. Well, actually, what he meant was that physics does not have a clue to why anything is centripetal. Consciousness, life force, a seed, gravity, all of these things are centripetal forces. And physics doesn't happen to have a clue to why anything is centripetal. So of course, physics didn't know how this device worked because centripetal forces require implosion to Planck. Here, it's very simple. Let's see if you can understand a very essential core principle here. The Planck length and time, the musical key signature of every wave physics has ever measured, is the same for billions of light years in all directions. Why did the universe agree? It's not about the Big Bang. That's childish crap. Actually, what happened is that when the waves imploded to Planck, that's called the gravity, okay? When waves implode to Planck, they have to distribute the resulting implosion into the distributing longitudinal EMF. Bearden proved is the only physics of gravity wave. And that longitudinal EMF had to be shareable. And so the longitudinal waves bounce around, golden ratio being the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. And so the longitudinal nodes have to agree for 1 billion light years in all directions. So that longitudinal wave bounces at the nodes, the golden ratio dynamic of all gravity waves, and so that achieves the distribution of charge. And those longitudinal waves propagate at golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, faster than light, the only physics of all action at a distance. And every spiritual story you ever heard is about the physics of action at a distance. So start learning about longitudinal waves. Hello. Einstein called it spooky because he didn't have a clue why objects fall to the ground. So once you learn why something is centripetal, then you can talk about healing something and making a soul. It's pretty simple. Anyway, I carry on.
Hannah, go ahead and jump in because I'm trying to find
did you want to go over the Planck-Fire formula? Because Dan brought it up and how this is such a major discovery for humanity that,
It's really, It's really simple. So you take the Planck length and time, 1.61 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and multiply by whole number exponents of golden mean ratio, which is fractality and golden ratio, fractality and phase conjugation perfected. Now, most physicists already know that fractality causes gravity, and they all agree that charge collapse causes gravity. What they don't know is that golden ratio is fractality perfective, and what they don't know is that Planck fire is the cause of charge collapse, which they already know is the cause of gravity and consciousness, charge collapse. So that implosion, that centripetal force tuned to Planck, that equation, Planck times golden ratio, predicts almost every negentropic phenomena in the universe. I mean, the radii of hydrogen, the wavelength of adenosine diphosphate, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, and 200 other physical variables very accurately. Read planckfire.com. And with the help of our friend Medrick, who just found another 100 physical variables identified by Planck times golden ratio at elphi.link. It's all linked at planckfire.com, which is the new book, which is available in 3 different formats. So that is the origin of all negentropy, all self-organization, the origin and cause of gravity, life force, and consciousness. So yeah, I think it's important.
And if I could just go over that, just because this might be new for a lot of James' audience. I'm not sure, how many people out there watching this now, if this is the first time that some of you all are hearing this, because,
I mean,
Dan's clearly got a lot of information.
Electrogravitics is just
a
one
lot of
example.
incredible information, but the Planck, this formula that Dan found that is so pivotal, just to make sure people really can grasp it. Because the way I see it in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but the way I've sort of created my own internal visual of what that formula would look like, right? If we were just going to start with a sphere that was Planck length, right? Planck length in terms of the diameter of the sphere, right? And then you're going to have that nested inside a larger sphere that would be exactly 1.618 the golden ratio, which is a known constant, exactly phi, the golden ratio, times larger than that nested sphere inside. And then it's a larger sphere, again, 1.618 times bigger than the next one. So you could actually calculate layers upon layers just by knowing, it's that perfected fractality of where the macro and the micro are identical. And it's all moving in harmony and synchronicity with one another, right? But just to give people of what that formula is really, so they really can understand, Planck is a known constant, it's a length, and then we're just dimensionally nesting it out in this fractalic reality, right?
Yes. Are you seeing the graphics here that just to go with this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you see that the animation just shows that it looks like a flame. It's actually a golden ratio sine wave inside a golden ratio sine wave. And that creates that implosive. And for example, we showed that's literally how hydrogen is built and the reason hydrogen makes gravity. And that literally then that equation there in blue predicts the harmonics in green here, which are the Schumann harmonics, this phase conjugate pump wave. So and here is literally the dimensions of hydrogen radii to many orders of accuracy, significant digits, Planck times integer exponents of golden ratio. And here's our published physics equations in the physics literature. Here's fractality perfected by golden ratio times Planck. So, and I'm grateful that Hanna has been such an enthusiastic communicator of this. It's wonderful. Here is how those Schumann harmonics, bottom right, become literally the brainwave harmonics that make bliss happen, and from flameandmind.com. And here's those brainwave harmonics enabling a child to see without her eyes, which then triggers the clairvoyance phenomena. There's the implosion. And then we show below here how this actually fits the university studies. Here's the braiding process here. So these are the harmonics university study have proven trigger lucid dreaming, which turn out to be close to Planck times golden ratio. And here's Planck times golden ratio in therify.net, replicably triggering lucid dreaming. That is the longitudinal coherence, which is the figure of physics of lucid dreaming and clairvoyance and ancestor memory. So you see, this is all fitting together into a very coherent model. Go ahead, Hanna. Yes.
I just wanted to, again, because I personally, it's sort of like, what's the education that we want our children to have, right? and for the children to know gravity, the solution's been found. This is the unifying field, and Planck is a known constant. Phi is golden ratio, known constant. And so just adding different integers, and for n, 0, 1, 2, on and on. Each time we put a different integer and perform this calculation, which you can see how simple it is, we're going to get a different result. And Dan, would it be accurate to say the result we do each time we put a different integer in, that number in a way represents a frequency that is supportive of the soul of human life force? Is that so that we can create sounds and light and materials with those frequencies? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's Planck length and time they co-define, divided by the speed of light. So it's in each case, it's a frequency and a wavelength. And you see from the tables, we've predicted literally hundreds of the most important physical variables in the universe: Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, adenosine diphosphate, all of the accurate Schumann harmonics, all of the sacrocranial pump harmonics that make Kundalini and bliss, the brainwave harmonics. They all fit this simple cascade because implosive charge collapse is the origin of all negentropy, life force, gravity, and consciousness.
And some people would say, well, what's the proof? But Dan, you all measured ionized hydrogen, and by putting the radii of the ionized hydrogen, the electron shell radii, and by putting in 116, 117, and 118, those three integers into this formula, produces the exact measurements as you all measured in the lab.
The radii of hydrogen, precisely.
That is the proof, as
that's a smoking gun. Absolutely,
yes. That is the proof, because there's a lot of people say, oh, well, what's the, that's what
there's no other explanation than exactly. But James is kindly showing the pictures of you, Hanna, operating the Therify there at Elena Danan and Donnie's conference in Orlando.
He was one of the very first people that got to try it out.
You see, so what's in that plasma tube is a noble gas triggered by a high frequency cascade, 500,000 volts, out the bifiller Tesla coil, which is in that black case under the table. And so now that into that noble gas, remember that noble gas is an optical phase conjugate. Yes, that's the bifiller Tesla coil under the table. And in the noble gas now, where we get optical phase conjugation in phase with the RF phase conjugation of the 500,000 volts, which is modulated by the infrasound cascade of 13 or so harmonics of golden ratio times Planck, all the way down to sub-Schumann. So it's a very big pine cone that's kissing noses accurately between those two tubes, which means it's a massively centripetal field. And you perceive it as a still point. It sort of feels like you just stepped into a beautiful cathedral, it depends. And your aura unpacks. It can be a bit dehydrating. It's often blissful. Actually, about 30% of sensitive women, for example, will feel some bliss or euphoria. And about 30% of people will experience some sharpening of vision. And we know the physics of vision is literally that phase conjugation. So
sense of smell tends to improve. That's one common thing as well.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Just the clarity. I actually visited, just a side note, I visited a Therify clinic in Connecticut yesterday, Damon Riddle, who healed himself from pancreatic cancer using this technology. And I walked up to the building and I distinctly felt myself entering that charge cloud. It was very distinct.
They call that. They call that saturating the space. I learned about that from Joe Sell and Lismore, who was using implosive capacitance for hydrolysis to run cars on water. And actually, he says, you wait a while until the space is saturated, and you literally saturate the air with an implosive capacitive field to the point where if a Therify is set up in beautiful nature, the residual field is such that you don't even need to turn it on again.
Which Eddie Garberville is doing out there in, Eddie Sharpless is doing out in Garberville, California, that beautiful building that he built.
Because the whole environment becomes implosive and it feels like a cathedral. So sacred space is actually teachable, and once you know the electrical engineering of implosions. Anyway.
And I'm really excited. I'm getting ready to order the shungite spheres to go on the piezo fire to use it for that, because my experience just trying it out, I was with my sister, for example, and she was using it, and I immediately felt the room begin to be conditioned. So I'm really looking forward, because to me it seems like this is like the mobile portable version of the Therify in a way,
Exactly.
be able to do it on the go in a hotel room, you know, wherever. I was just running the full cascade of the the full chakra cascade, just like this, without the Chambing spheres. But
the audio output power of your iPhone is sufficient. It's amazing. James, did you have a question there? We carried on. How are we doing, James?
I was trying to find it. I think this is the plasma fire, but I lost my audio when I played it.
It's plasmafire.com. So what in the case of
we can't hear you, James.
Yeah, we did lose your audio.
He was up with Sean Callahan.
Oh, I see. Yeah. That's great. Yes. So that's plasmafire.com. Plasmafire, PHIRE.com. And those are battery powered. The battery means you can run it in nature, but the battery also means you can deliver the frequencies well below 20 hertz that you can't get with the stuff that you plug in. You can get 1 hertz. And when you modulate lower than 1 hertz, I tell you, you know, surfers of the Zavudia, Jose Argoyes was right. Ride the long wave, Uncle Joe. The long wave is ensoulment, guys.
By having less than 0.1 hertz, by going very, very, very tiny.
Also the super low frequencies are the long wave, and the longest wave of embedding, the longest wave of memory is literally the physics of ensoulment for sure.
And they're inaudible, right? Infrasound is inaudible to human ear.
When you plug in the piezo fire and you're plugging it into the audio output of any audio device, you can run it on WAV files. You don't even need iOS now. You can actually hear the piezoelectric. You can hear the ringing in the piezo fire from the piezoelectric.
I do hear the slight ringing, but
you hear that in the piezo device. But you won't hear it in the inductive, but you'll hear it in the piezo device.
I noticed that because I wasn't interesting. I noticed I heard it sometimes, but not all the time.
But it's
I
actually
can just do a quick demo too.
When they played the ringing, we played the ringing in the ears heard by bliss meditators, and we calculated the frequencies. It's the same physics. When people have kundalini and they have ringing in their ears, and then they say, "Oh, my ancestors are making phone calls."
That has happened to me, and I do feel that is what's going on because it's then been, you know, synchronistic with what I felt was getting, you know, wisdom from. But I just thought it might be fun to show people how simple with this, you know, it's a smartphone app. And then I did need to buy a special connector for, you know, the iPhone.
This is the Flame and Sound app. Flame and Sound, Flame and Mind app.
This is just $15 right on the App Store. And then you come over here to binaural, which I have used this just on regular speakers in the room, and that's quite powerful.
Or headphones. It was the world's most powerful bliss binaural sound before we drove piezo fire with it. And there's a new video in the quick start file at piezofire.com, so you can actually see that working on the iPad screen, a little bigger screen there.
Nice.
And the new
the iPad is definitely preferable, but the portability of the phone, you know, people typically carry their phone with them a lot. But just to show people how simple it is, you click over here going to the coil and plasma feature of the app right there.
Yeah, and then you generate the harmonics.
I typically just go to the frequency tables, and then it has a whole list of body parts, and then you could just say, okay, this is lower leg, you know, and then click on that. So now
and that's the harmonics. You actually see the harmonics, and there's one called the full chakra cascade, which is particularly powerful there.
That's the one I was just running in the room right here, the full chakra cascade. So but Dan, I did want to ask, you know, I noticed not all of the body parts are on there. Is that something that's going to be updated over time, or?
Yes, remember, we're gradually offering most of those audio options as separately downloadable, simple high-res audio wave
I thought that was an alternative.
And everybody who gets a machine now gets access to that iCloud library, so they don't need iOS to run. You know, they can, but it's programmable either way. So,
yes, I see what you're saying.
The point is that after years of work on which audio cascades trigger, say, the heart versus the head versus what part, the liver, for example, you now can actually select at will. And most people can feel it where you intend. You can pick what part of the body you ring. And that sound file driver drives piezo fire, plasma fire, quantify, and therify. They're all driven with the same equation.
Yeah, so, and the way I've been doing it is just, you know, I'll do about a 15-minute session, And then I'll have, the person sometimes hold it on their body or wrap clothing if they're wearing clothing. I'm thinking maybe in the future getting some kind of something to wrap around to hold it in place. And then I've just been doing the 15-minute sessions. But to me, every time when I utilize it, I feel it helps me, my whole body, reach a very deep meditative state. And that this is technology, the human body, this is the most incredible technology. And so we're really just training wheels to help the body remember its own energetic coherence.
Is that also help you go into bliss?
Well, it started as, pain relief. That's how it started. We had a guy with our friend, he had a separated shoulder, serious shoulder problem. And after a period of a week or two, he was so excited and pleased that he actually got a machine and started. But so localized pain, we were able to help dramatically. And then later we learned you could saturate the space with it. And as Patrick, who helped us develop these things, he convinced us eventually that, hey, you don't need 500,000 volts if the frequency signature is correct and you actually focus. So originally we said piezofire.com can do it in many cases where the issue is localized. And particularly for localized issue, you can really focus in that tingling presence. It's simply restored centripetal force.
Okay. Hold your thoughts there, Hannah. Let's go.
I know. I try to hold
our audience members has some
Thank
questions.
You, Hanna.
How about this? From Darrow, I have a question for Dan. Some metals healthy when grounded into the earth, such as being close to grounded aluminum, maybe copper, gold, silver? What do you think about, or bismuth? How about maybe talk about bismuth?
Yeah, there's a gradation of metals. For example, gold is fabulous. It's a phase conjugator. Silver is pretty nice. Copper ain't too bad. We think steel and then aluminum are about the worst. Now, that still doesn't mean that all aluminum is evil. However, if you put your hand on aluminum, you will feel your hand start to go numb, literally numb. And there's an electric reason for that. And also, if you have an aluminum roof on your house, people who are sensitive will realize that there's a interference with the dreaming process because your aura can't propagate efficiently. It's called dielectric constant. Essentially, it means that every protein that was once alive, or every molecule, has rearranged itself to be more fractal and distributing charge efficiently, named dielectric constant. So biologic materials are high dielectric, which means simply capacitance can distribute. Aluminum is the opposite of that. Now, it's true, though, if you have a metal structure and you provide a good ground, your body can use that for a while. But actually, if you want to radiate your charge efficiently, then in that case, Steiner was right. The children should always touch only organic living, like living fabric, living stone, living wood, because their aura being able to propagate through what they're touching is the introduction to the physics of soul. Whereas every time a child touches plastic or heavy metal, steel or aluminum, their aura is blocked, and their ability to unpack and distribute their aura, which literally is inhibiting the distribution of soul, which sometimes called heaven. Hey, Ave, breath of charge takes flight, heaven. So it's very simple physics that metal, by inhibiting aura distribution, does inhibit life force in general. Was there any other fun questions?
Yes, we got a couple more, or two more. From New Grower, when he says the dog has no soul, is the soul 100% gone, or is it just damaged and distorted? Is everyone's soulless that plugs into these Bluetooth headphones? It's scary. I hope that isn't the truth.
Well, we're not saying that the first time you plug in the Bluetooth, you lose your soul immediately. But we're saying that kids who spend many, many hours with that Bluetooth, that sharp square wave so fractionates the aura that the chance of lucid dreaming rapidly goes down. And so that child will eventually probably, not take memory through death, actually. So Bluetooth, long-term use of Bluetooth, we believe is highly electrically dangerous to the soul. Now that we know exactly what that is, and it's measurable, it's not subjective, it's real, it's solid. That's longitudinal coherence. Regarding the dog, actually, most of the spiritual traditions say that under certain circumstances, animals become ensouled. And you have seen dogs, track their dead owners, and cats reincarnate. No, I think there's lots of potential for plasma coherence between lifetimes of animals. I would never say that animals have no soul. No, especially in the presence of love. So, we're saying now that we teach the physics of soul, that spirituality got more rich and beautiful and exciting.
Thank you. Okay. Dan, what are some of the practical applications of the knowledge that we've learned here today?
Well, what we're saying is now we can say what environments and what activities, very, very specifically and practically, enable the human aura to grow. Access to sacred space, access to magnetic lines, access to bliss hygiene, access to yoga, access to live food. All of these are activities which allow the human aura to grow and implode and become coherent. And that is the physics of soul. And there is nothing more important or practical on this earth than teaching the children how to have bliss and access to a soul. So I say it is urgent. It is that we are, because all the kids right now believe there's, they need a AI and some damn computer to have immortality. And the opposite is the truth. Those metal machines will never, ever, ever have a soul in them, because that kind of plasma implosion is not possible inside a metal machine. And so you got a billion kids right now all focused on AI and Bluetooth because they haven't been taught what a soul is. And so they're losing theirs.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about electroculture. I don't know if you're
Electroculture
too much about it.
power. When you learn to put the copper rod into the carrot in the sand properly, that carrot is going to be dramatically longer. It's a very simple electrical process because it increases the voltage difference between the sky and the earth, and you grow longer carrots. It's very practical. Electroculture is a very beautiful and powerful thing, but there are some things. It would be good if you knew a little bit about dowsing and geobiology and magnetic lines and all those things to put all that together. But electroculture is a beautiful introduction to spirituality. But the fundamental thing is, the more you have access to bliss, the more you can feel the magnetic lines. Your hair stands up because your DNA learned to implode.
Wow, thank you. So yeah, well, we can always talk about electroculture another show. But let's see here. We have. Could you comment about chemistry? According to Thomas in the Breakaway, the secret space program Breakaway, they use the same chemical catalyst for LSD, but it sent molecules that exit the body via sweat. So I guess, how does sacred geometry affect chemistry?
Well, sacred geometry is a name for chemistry. Every chemical bond is sacred geometry. The thing is, the geometry of psychoactive molecules is a beautiful study, actually. For example, ayahuasca, you make an ally of the plant. And the first time you go to the mushroom, you think you are seeing through its interstellar mycelial spore fabric. But then the second time you go to the same mushroom, you realize that it is seeing through you. And you realize the issue was who was more centripetal. And so this introduces the whole area of what I call astral hygiene, which is, it's true that most people who use ayahuasca a lot, they become more able to see the plasma entities, but they become more afraid of them. Why? Because their aura became more porous. Why did their aura become more porous? Because the centripetal force was no longer as symmetrical when they used external stimuli to implode. So astral hygiene means you have to make your aura implode from an internal centripetal force. And if you use too much external chemistry, it's holes in the aura time, kids. And that's measurable. It's not subjective.
Well, Dan,
that's astral hygiene 101.
What about microdosing on shrooms? They're saying that helps with depression and so on.
Yes, and I do believe that's really very true. I think microdosing is a rich field. I do suggest, however, that people who are doing these things learn aura measurement, things like GDV, et cetera. And you can actually measure the holes in the aura and begin to learn about astral hygiene. But no, it's true that for therapy and things, there's many. The ayahuasca has been used for addiction. There's a whole field here and actually what it is that it's similar to those who have access to a death experience. It's called the resurrection, the lost art of resurrection. That's what it's called. So my father had a near-death experience, and he was spiritual for the rest of his life. Okay, same with Daniel Brinkley. Well, what happens is their DNA imploded and became a superconductor at the moment of that still point, and that gave them reference, absolute point of reference to a larger field effect. So and that's why people who have intense depression or addiction, you give them some new way to have a bliss experience, and that can give them a whole new lease on life. It's a beautiful but very subtle field, and shamanic skill is required, because on the opposite side of that, these people doing these ridiculous continuous ayahuasca experiences, and they're coming out of there with auras full of holes.
There's a story you tell about the pen of where the man did the slight movement with the hair, but the audience could feel it because it was so subtle.
That was Bob
right?
Beck. Yeah, he took his Bic pen with a metal ring and he rubbed it in his hair so it was a bit static, and then he did the exactly 8 hertz, and the wave of euphoria went through the room. But you play that same 8 hertz at high voltage and nobody gets euphoria. You know why? Because the body knows that the Schumann is weak.
And can you, since we're talking about, was it Bob Becker, the body electric? He described how.
That's Robert O. Becker. I knew him quite well also.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think they killed him? Or was that a natural cause? I think they say like he fell on his steps.
I suspect that was conspiracy theory. It's true that he showed that a bias voltage controlled the moment when a tadpole could regenerate his tail. I was in his lab with him for a while there in Syracuse, and it was very instructive, because that bias voltage is the beginning of the understanding of how bliss enables growth. It's actually that bias voltage, low voltage, micro voltage, is life force. So he was onto something beautiful there, and it's true. He was immensely ostracized by his profession. All the professors in the medical, they hated him because he was doing pure energy medicine and big pharma. So he was immensely ostracized and then depressed after that. So, he did lose it, but I don't know about the killing bit. I don't know.
So that particular technology could regenerate limbs, like
absolutely. Oh yes. And it was actually used for that purpose. They do stimulate low DC bias voltage for tissue regeneration and skin regeneration. And actually a form of that is the bias voltage called Therify.net, which is implosive bias voltage.
Well, if the technology was that effective, why is it not more widely in use?
Well, big pharma ran the world for how many decades now? Okay. but energy medicine is coming into its own rather rapidly, and the ultimate energy medicine is people learning to grow their own aura. Everyone you choose to hug or everything you choose to eat, if all decisions are based on whether my aura is going to grow.
So, Dan, you said you knew Preston Nichols and
and Al Bielek quite well, yeah.
So, what were some of the things that Preston told you?
Preston was using what he called the Deca Delta antenna, which was essentially an octahedron. And what he didn't know is that if you tuned it by my equation, it would phase conjugate more accurately. But at that time, they had just learned that accurate phase conjugation will produce neg entropy and time reversal. But what they didn't understand, that time reversal in physics always means moving toward order. You can't time reverse toward disorder. But so at Montauk, they actually created a wrinkle in time. They created a tremendous astral hygiene problem for the whole planet, where it's one of the reasons the Greys got in here, because the holes in the aura of Earth by things like Montauk, it was seriously bad news. And Johnny von Neumann went nuts, and Tesla told him, get out of here, you ain't supposed to be doing that. So no, it was bad news largely. And they actually communicated in the raid on Aldebaran with many higher cultures, and there was something called the time empath. Last story I will tell about that. The guy that sat in the time chair, the Draco named Charlie, who actually ran the place, they had to use the kids who were lucid dreamers, and the Dracos couldn't steer the time chair, which is the imploding dodeca, because no soul. But the one who could steer the time chair was named the time empath. Think about that.
Duncan Cameron?
Well, Duncan was one of the team, but he actually he lost a lot of memory too there. But the point was, Nostradamus was able to see the future because he sucked the future into himself, because he felt the pain of those whom he saw. So the empathy is the implosion that sucks the vortex into you. That's why the name of that person is called the time empath. Literally the ability to feel it, which is literally the physics of how you steer a tornado.
Oh wow, amazing. And what about Al Balick? Did you know Dan McBolin?
No, I lived around Al for quite a few years there around Atlanta, and we had a lot of fun together. And I did believe his stories. You know, he was the half brother of, and they came back at different timelines. I think he told the truth, actually. But I don't think they actually understood much of the physics. The physics problem was simple. It started on the Philadelphia when the two generators on opposite sides of the ship, which were supposed to provide simple radar cover, they were not phase locked in opposite 180 degrees out of phase. So they didn't phase conjugate accurately. You know, the soldiers on the ship, Philadelphia, they were dreaming of the bar they were going to go to on the weekend. And that's where they all ended up after the time travel, where they were dreaming of going. But the ones that got stuck in the ship, their DNA was not coherent enough to implode because, and this is why Johnny von Neumann literally went nuts driving that thing, because they didn't understand how to phase conjugate accurately.
Well, thank you for that. So do you think Al Balick has escaped into the multiverse somewhere? He might still be alive.
You know, even Elena Denon accurately reports that too much use of the portals is actually very dizzying and potentially soul scrambling. So this business of bouncing around timelines is actually, it's the opposite of what the Templars called the repair of the fabric of time, William Bueller's work, goldenmean.info/Bueller. So the repair of the fabric of time was the opposite of what was done at Montauk. In fact, they were actively engaged in repairing the holes in the aura of Earth because of things like that. So these people, you know, they didn't understand that physics very well. And Al Balick was a very sweet guy, but I don't think the deep physics was part of his understanding.
Dan, do you think you could put a presentation together for us about Montauk and the Delta Teach antenna chair and how they opened up the portal, like what you know? Do you think you could do one for us?
Well, yeah, you know why Jodie Foster used the dodecahedron, and then in the end you thought it was time travel, and then you realized it was lucid dream, and then you realized it was both.
Okay.
No, I'd be happy to talk about that. Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Well, I'm gonna be respectful for you because I know it's late over there.
Yeah, it is. It's plus my throat is wearing out, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. Hanna, do you have any final comments?
Well, I just had one sort of comment on basically what it sounded like there at the end. We were talking about how Johnny von Neumann sort of was really disturbed because the phase conjugate waves were not in alignment. They were not in alignment now, and so that just seems like it was something set up like that to purposefully create a rip in space-time. And just want to say that I think that there's a lot that we can do to heal those types of disturbances. And we were doing some of that work in France and getting ready to do more of it in September. So there are things we can do to reverse that negentropic,
exactly
that any of that damage that was done. It's all healable, and that's what we really want to focus on now, especially.
Yeah. And we've been doing rainmaking here in France, goldenmean.info/rain. And that's all we found a place where the magnetic vortex through the center of the valley was like ripped up in an old ancient Roman sacred circle. And we did major work and last year was a drought. This year, it's a tropical rainforest here.
That's such great news. I've been wondering about that.
James, I think your mic was off. Sorry, James.
I'm good. Okay.
Sorry.
Somebody call me. I'll just tell him call
back.
Okay,
we also want to thank Hanna so much because Hanna has the enthusiasm and dedication to make this shareable. So thank you, Hanna.
I got to try to contain it at times, but I am very, I had a lucid dream about, for example, this piezo fire before it was released. I had a dream about a device that was like a pocket version of the Therify, and I said, "Oh, we got to do this," and I found out days after that Dan and his team was and Patrick and everyone's getting ready to release
and
it. So
Hanna and her friend Alasa is working on a series of children's books about this, and you can see one of them at plankfire.com as well. So thank you very much, both of you guys. It's been
And
wonderful.
what about Paul? Hanna weren't you working with a Paul too, Dan?
Paul originally helped me build parts of the Therify, building that coil, for example. Yes, in Canada.
Do you think you two could get back together again, work on some more projects?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. You know, there's been economic stresses there, and but yes, you know, they're all working now. We're working with Grenier, Rob Grenier, who is a real expert on carbon nano implosion and the Malcolm Bendel projects. And the Malcolm Bendel project is an example of literally fractal implosive charge collapse, as in the example of phase conjugate carbon and a carbon fullerene, exactly this dodecacosa geometry, which is literally charge collapse implosion, the perfect spark. You know, Tesla started with the carbon arc, and that's the perfect geometry of the Clathrate cage of water, same model, which is the stellation of hydrogen. And so all this fits together in the physics of charge collapse, and all of it is tunable with plankfire.com. You can perfect the 0-point energy devices, but we'll carry on another time on that.
So plankfire.com, the Therify, what is that? Therify.com?
Therify.net.
.net.
Yeah, but we also have that .com. And then physicsofsoul.com has the summary of what we're working on tonight here, actually. And our fractalu.com has a whole series of courses online about this. And our YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, has a 400 film, 3 million views, 50,000. So we're a shareable wave, we hope.
Yeah, you got to get your bio updated with links to all that, and your Amazon. How many books have you written?
I have 5 books right now on Amazon. The links are all at plankfire.com.
Okay.
And we'll be having more soon. That's the second last one. This is the most recent one, plankfire.com. Yes.
And I just want to note too, James and I are planning to go to that Greensboro event and hopefully meet Bob and Malcolm and get to see that thunderstorm. And I, just looking at the PDF of how it works, I had a feeling it was going to be very much in alignment with your work, Dan.
It's the perfect arc of charge collapse. And Rob Grenier understands that very well. We're buddies.
Bob, yeah, it sounds fascinating. I'm really looking forward to it. So
Cool.
Psychics of the soul, physics of the soul. And Doug, thank you, Doug. Thank you for that. So guys, we're going to call it a day here. So if you have more questions for Dan, put it in the comment section, and if there's like overwhelming response, we'll bring you back, or if you want to just do the Montauk one, I would like to have you come back for that one.
That sounds like fun. Let's do it. Sure, why not?
Okay.
Stories to tell.
If you do this, if you could put this PowerPoint presentation together, you can share it at conferences, because I'm sure you're probably traveling all summer doing conferences. So
well, and people can see the library of the history of our slideshows, fractalfield.com/slideshow, and you'll see the library of the history of slideshows. Thank you. Great information.
Thanks,
all right,
everyone.
Love and light to you all.
Let's
call it.
Bye,
everybody.
See you soon.
Sorry, I found this. There it is. Oh wait, hold on. I gotta get rid of this banner. Wait, where are you guys? The comments. Sarah, I love you too, Sarah. Bye. We're gonna get out of here.
We had fun.
Yeah, that was great. I enjoyed it.
Please consider supporting Super Soldier Talk by purchasing your own Neo Meditation device. Your Neo Meditation device will help you reduce stress, integrate trauma, enhance intuition, enhance clairvoyance, and enhance creativity. Get yours now at www.neologicaltech.com.